Thanks again for attending our second in a series of 3 workshops. After this busy hurricane season, we are more aware than ever of the importance of reducing our flood risk and the ever-rising expense of flood insurance. Firm is dedicated to keeping our insurance rates as affordable as possible. One way to do that is to make our homes and buildings more resilient in order to withstand both windstorms and flooding. And before I continue, I guess I failed to introduce myself. Sorry about that. My name is Mel Montagny, and I've had the pleasure of being the president of Firm for about the last 3 or 4 years. And before I go on, I'd like to recognize some of my board members that are here, people that are instrumental in getting our voices here, our voices in Monroe County heard, both in Tallahassee and Washington and several other areas. I'd like to recognize Lee Cummings, Teresa Faber, Karen Morrell, Steve Russ, Michelle White. I'd also like to recognize Scott Frazier, who is here. He is the City of Key West FEMA Coordinator and Floodplain Administrator. Scott, thank you. I'd also like to recognize Allison Higgins. She is the City of Key West Sustainability Director. Thank you, Allison. Our first workshop in the series covered the basics of knowing your flood zone and obtaining elevation certificates. This is the ones we did last year. The binders you received tonight include the information covered in that workshop, along with updated information for tonight's presentation. The workshop is being televised on Monroe County TV, will be available for later viewing also on the Monroe County website and our own firm website as well. Our presenter for these workshops is Rod Scott. Rod has over 25 years experience in contracting and specializes in flood recovery and historic preservation. Rod has worked in the flood mitigation industry in several capacities over the last 10 years and was awarded the National Flood Proofing Award for his outreach work after Sandy on the East Coast. So without any further ado, Rod Scott.
Thank you, Rod. Good evening. Really a pleasure to be here, a lovely day in Key West. And I come out of a coastal Louisiana town that's had 7 major floods in 14 years since Katrina. We have a seawall. We don't have a levee. So we've been in your boat many times, and my community has managed to get itself 71% elevated now. A lot of hard work. None of this is easy, but it works. And we reduced our damages, same 9-foot surge from Katrina to Isaac, from 25 million down to 7 million in the same storm. So the elevation works, dry flood proofing works, and we're going to run through. I've always believed that you as property owners are the ones who are making the decisions. You've got to have this data and information as you get through that debris removal stage. You're getting your insurance all figured out, or you're looking at SBA or some of the other funding opportunities to get rebuilt. And if you're in one of these structures that was built before a flood map, when did we come in with flood maps in the Keys? Basically
1975.
75s, yeah. So if you're built before 75, you're called a pre-flood map structure, and the flood insurance is changing. So we need to look at this rebuild from this storm and the people in Harvey, especially out there in Texas. If you live in one of those structures, we need to look at mitigating those structures this time, as opposed to the cycle of rebuild, which we've done for the last 40-some years with these buildings. So I want to talk to you about the steps to getting the structure mitigated from flood, reducing flood risk, and reducing flood insurance policies. So let's get through there. There's some contact information for me. There's a little information from Ducky Johnson, who's a sponsor of this program. I want to thank Firm. We've actually been talking for 2 years to get this put on, and we just happened to have the hurricane, so it's even more important that we do this education now. We're doing it for 3 different nights. If you know people that didn't make it tonight, have them come up to Key Largo tomorrow night and Marathon the following night on Thursday night. I will stay and answer every question that's done here because it's about you, it's not about us, and I'm on your schedule. So let's go from there. So thanks to FIRM, thanks to all the board and the sponsors and the communities that have pitched in the funding to get us some lodging down here, and then the industry. And this company, Ducky Johnson of Florida Elevation Company, actually funded my services, my fees and expenses and meals and stuff like that. So rental car, all the stuff that it takes to get down here into the Keys. This is my first trip to the Keys, long on the bucket list. Probably not the way we were going to do it as a vacation, but it's even more because I get to meet all of you. I met a fishing boat captain today up in Big Pine, and his house survived, and he's got to go up. And so when we do this process with your building, I've done 1,500 of these. Some big buildings, commercial buildings, but a lot of homes and families. And literally, we've had shrimp boils and family members come out and watch the house go up, and it's just a real process. So I have friends all over the country that I've helped do this now, and that's kind of how you are when we get involved with you, because it's your house. So here we are in a new era. We're not going to use that political hot potato button comment or term right now, but the climate she's a-changing, and I don't care who caused it, and it's changed before, and we live near the water, and we have to adapt. We cannot stay at high risk in this changing environment. So there's Maria right behind Irma. Luckily, she went a different track. Poor Puerto Rico took both. So, and boy, they got a mess. So this is the thing we're facing. They're saying next summer is going to be an open summer too. We won't have the other weather system that kind of chases them out. So we just gotta work at this. And this isn't that complex, but it is specialized. And so that's why we want to teach you the steps of how to get through or approach this and how to make decisions. So there's 3 types of mitigation for your structures. One is wet flood proofing. You don't elevate, you don't dry flood proof. You raise your electrical outlets, you raise your mechanical systems, your water heater and your air conditioners to above whatever the flood level, but you don't raise the building. You reduce your future flood risks. You put the concrete board up on your wainscot 4 feet up, and you wet flood proof it essentially, but you get no flood insurance discounting for that. So you have to balance whether that's really what you want to do or if that's what you want to do and continue on. Then there's elevation, and that is the only way to mitigate either relocation or elevation or tear it down are the only options for residential buildings currently in this country. Europe doesn't have a flood insurance program. They don't have a mitigation program. Neither does Canada. We're the only ones that mitigate the flood risk and reduce our flood insurance in the world. So it's pretty cool. We've kind of figured it out in this country. And then there's dry flood proofing, which is all the non-residential buildings, churches, meeting halls, commercial buildings, things that have no residential component. Because residential is different, you have fewer options. It's just elevate or relocate or tear it down and build new. So this is our program. Again, we're the only country in the world that has a federally backed flood insurance program. The poor people in Canada and Europe that have been seeing more and more floods, they really don't have much of a program, and they're taking it out of their pockets on these increasing flood events. Unfortunately, in our country, we don't have the penetration of the flood insurance that we really should. Texas ended up with 20% flood insurance penetration. So people they carry casualty insurance and wind insurance, but they don't carry flood insurance because it's been a long time since the Keys got hit, and we get kind of an amnesia, and we just don't think it's right. We don't need it, and we roll the dice, and then the flood comes. So the flood insurance program is a great program. For 40 years, all the buildings built before a flood map, because there was no map to build to, Key West 1890s buildings, the 1950s concrete block buildings, all of those were built before a flood map. So we didn't really have an idea of flood risk and flood levels. They were subsidized. Since the flood maps came in, we subsidized those, said, don't worry, you weren't built to a flood map. We're going to give you a low rate. And then if you build new, you have to build to this other standard to get that low rate. Well, after Katrina and Sandy, and the others in between Katrina and Sandy, the 6 or 7, ended up $20 billion in the hole in the country. We owed ourselves $20 billion, and we're paying interest, and our kids are going to have to pay that interest. And we had to figure it out. And so we've decided as a country to remove those subsidies on those older buildings. Slowly. They were going to do it all at once, and everybody freaked out, and I did too, and everybody freaked out. So the Congress went back and readjusted that to a curve. And it depends on the type of building you have for the rate of increase that those buildings are going to have. So if you're a primary residential, it's 12% a year increase. So you got about 15, 16 years till you get to the full risk rate for that building. And that's based on how far below what we call the zero mark, or what we call the minimum elevation. The flood map elevation is really a minimum height, and we always encourage people to go above that 1 or 2 feet. You get even more discounts on your flood insurance when you go up above the minimum. So if you have any building that's not primary residential, you're between 19 and 25% per year increase. Income producing buildings, second homes, severe repetitive loss buildings who've had multiple floods, and you've got that letter from FEMA that says you now are in this category. So those insurance rates are going up at 25% a year. You have 5 years, 6 years until you're at actuarial for those properties. I know I have to give you all this castor oil first and make you swallow it and spoon, and then we get on to the how we do it stuff. So it's just the reality, and it's just what we're all facing. There's 3 million of these buildings in this country. So you're not alone if you have one of these older buildings. Okay, so here's the rate increases. It's a graph that FEMA provides, but you can see, basically if you're 4 feet below the map level currently, you're going to be at $9,500 a year, basically, roughly, for a $250,000 policy. If you got a $500,000 commercial policy, you're roughly at almost $20,000 a year, out into the future whenever that rate hits its peak. So we have some time, but we got to do something with these buildings. These buildings create tax revenues for our communities. 50 cents out of every tax revenue goes to a school. The other tax revenues get spread out into all the other operations of our governments, sewer, roads, police, fire. They just did a study in Miami Beach that we saw this last weekend that Miami Beach produces 42% of the entire state's revenues from these old historic buildings, because everybody comes on cruise ships and they see these old buildings and they love these old buildings and they spend money and they stay, and it's a sense of place created by these old buildings. So these old buildings are important, and they're important to our communities, they're important to our schools, and they're really important to you because you own them. All right, so that's the rate curve that everything's going up at. And here's the graph. So if you're at base flood elevation, you're at $9,500 a year. When it reaches actuarial, whenever that is, if you go to base flood elevation, which is the 0 point on the map, elevation-wise, you're about $1,400 a year in the A zone. Now, if you're in the V zone, or what we call the voodoo zone with the higher waves, these rates are below what those rates are going to be. And if you're at 3 feet above, you're at $427 a year. So when you think about it, you own an older structure that's facing these rates eventually. If you elevate, that's your cost savings, and that money can actually literally go back into paying for the project or a portion of the project, or however we do the financing on this, because there's several ways to get at the financing, and we'll talk about that. Everybody understand that? I won't take any questions till the end, but I see some nodding heads, not very pleasant. Okay, let's get on to how we do it. Let's get past that. That's just a challenge that we have. In 1960, we said we're going to go to the moon. This state sent everybody to the moon. We had no idea how we're going to do it. Let's do this, okay? It's a construction project with a specialized component at the front end, and that's the lifting part. All right, so if you're going to dry or wet flood proof, there's a bulletin by FEMA that you go to. It's called Technical Bulletin 7, and that shows you and tells you and talks about the water-resistant materials, elevating your mechanical systems above whatever the flood level on the maps is supposed to be, and your flood venting, okay, of the walls. You have the openings in the walls so that the flood doesn't cave in your walls. That's one thing that we always see with the flooding is the walls that didn't have venting, they collapse in. So the flood vents are really important to let that water come and go. And there's different kinds of vents, and there's engineered vents and non-engineered vents, but be that as it may, flood venting is very important if you wet floodproof. And the problem is that we don't get any flood insurance rate reductions for those wet floodproofing activities, but you will reduce future damages. So elevation works. Here's some really cool pictures right after Harvey. You know, Houston has had 3 floods in 3 years. Charleston, 3 floods in 3 years. That's a tough one to recover. You know your circumstances, the financial requirements of recovery. So on the left is an elevated structure, a couple of pictures of it. On the right, actually on either side of this building, were non-elevated buildings, and we all recognize debris piles, and that's our stuff. That's our couches, that's our TVs, I've seen it, I've worked in this for 30 years. That's our stuff. We don't want to be there. We want to be on the other side of that. So elevating 3 or 4 feet in Houston made the difference for those people who had elevated their houses, retrofitted them, elevated them, and voila, no flooding. In fact, a couple of them sold right after the flood for more than they were worth. People just offered them cash, and boom, they were sold, and off they go. And we see that a lot with the retrofitted structures. In my community, 70% elevated. Everybody loves those historic buildings, and once they're up, they're even more attractive. They're going for more than their listing price in my town. So it's a good investment, actually, we've seen. So here we go. A lot of discussion within this field of historic preservation that I work in, not only flood mitigation, but historic preservation. This is an 1870s, 1860s building. It's actually a timber frame building with bricks between the timber frames. It's called brick between post. Very common, English and German all built them that way. On our lakefront, probably seen 50 floods since it was built, 60 floods, who knows? We're in Hurricane Alley where we are. It just funnels right up into that Mississippi River thing. On the left is pre-elevation. On the right is post-elevation. It's actually 9 feet high. These pictures just don't do it justice. You actually walk in under it. It's on piers. Because it was elevated, you have to, by code, have railings. So they kind of copied an old picture that they had. So they had those beautiful X marks railings put on because that's code. And it's up and elevated, and they park underneath in the back. And what's one of the biggest problems at the beach or these islands? There's not enough parking. They were built before automobiles. Once you get them up, there's actually room to park underneath. You never want to put the parking right in the front because then you got a garage right under your house, and it's not very attractive. But if you've got space on the side yard to get in and underneath, that's how we require it in our properties, because we've got enough space on these old properties to do that. But it's really attractive, and it's won some awards, and the people are very happy, and their investment came back to them. They plan on staying there. They're both retired, and they're going to stay there 4 or 5 more years and capitalize out on the property. Here's another one that's a low elevation, we call it. It's on piers, which is really kind of the stuff that a lot of Key West is going to do on the higher levels. Higher elevations of the island is the lower elevations of 3-4 feet. And so there it was sitting next to the ground, 2 or 3 floods, went up about 4.5, 5 feet, maybe 4.5 feet, can't remember the exact. A new staircase, and it's beautiful, and they're very happy. And when the storm starts in the Gulf, they don't get the eyeballs and the lack of sleep and the thing in the gut. We all know what I'm talking about. It works. It's great. And then here's a high one in the V zone with the open foundation underneath. And we've even had all of this change and demand is creating innovation. So in our community, we require some kind of screening behind these upper elevated homes, so you're not seeing all the stuff that we store in there, the lawnmower and the car. And so we put lattice work behind those columns at the back of the bottom sill plate. And in the past, they were hard fixed. And when the flood came, the debris hits that and it caves it in, and then that stuff's floating around. and a couple of homeowners got together and started putting hinges on and they're hinging them up now, and so they just hinge them up for the storm and move everything out from under, and water comes and the water goes, and we're living with our water now because we're never going to have a levee, and we're going to live like this now. And all of them are up almost except for 2 or 3 on the lakefront now, and 3 blocks back where our surge goes into. It's really amazing. All right, let's talk about how it works. Every dollar, they just got a new study out, new government study funded by several government agencies. They have now proven that retrofit elevation used to be $4 for every dollar you spend, saves $4 in disaster recovery costs. Now it's estimated at $6 in disaster recovery costs. Whether it be you or the government, it really saves money in the future. It preserves the property's resale values. The reality is different communities are experiencing it differently. High value areas like this that haven't had repetitive damages, your values are still pretty high with these older structures. My town's elevated 70%, there's 30 left on the ground. They're behind the curve and they have to give up the cost of the elevation to sell their property. So it's, Miami Beach with 9,500 of these buildings on their little island, they haven't seen the drops in values yet. You haven't here either. The values are still pretty high, but ultimately it preserves those resale values to mitigate, because every year those insurance rates are going up. And it preserves the tax revenues, which are so important for our resiliency efforts in our communities, because as we revenue bond for sewers and improve drainage, and Miami Beach is elevating their streets, their main streets that flood all the time, all that takes money and you have to pay it back through your tax revenues. So it preserves those vital tax revenues, greatly reduces the solid waste stream into the landfill. When we remove all the drywall and our furniture and our possessions to the curb, that fills up the landfills. Landfills are a limited space in our society, and call me a green grandfather. I got 5 grandbabies, another one on the way. The more we can reduce those streams to the landfill, C&D, construction and demolition debris, already creates 30 or 40% of our landfill space, takes it up. Average house is 30 tons of materials. So when we demolish a house, it's like 30 tons of materials goes to the landfill. And so we want to reduce that. We want to improve our houses and reuse them again for multiple mortgages into the future, because they're good houses. They're just low and at high risk of flooding. And then our elevation projects employ every single trade. Electricians work, plumbers work, concrete guys work, carpenters work, masons work. It's a great program. We employ all the trades. And that's not including our specialized people that work on the actual lifting of the structure. So let's talk and look at our equipment, talk about our equipment, because it is very unique, and you all haven't done a lot of it here. So this is what you'll see, because I have every confidence that Key West and the other keys are going to start this process to elevate their structures. In the background is a slab elevation. Slab structures on pilings are a structural slab. We can lift the whole slab and everything. So wood frame houses, concrete block houses, solid brick houses, stone houses, we can lift them all. Put new foundations under them, reattach them to their new foundation. It sounds kind of crazy, but when you've seen it 1,500 times like I have, it's an amazing process. Highly trained, highly skilled, multiple year experienced people. So that machine right there on that trailer is a hydraulic unified jacking machine. Costs around $100,000 for just the machine. Then you've got 9,500 PSI hoses. You have hydraulic jacks, wood cribbing, 2 crew trucks that show up with flatbed trailers with materials. There's insurance. Let's talk insurance. You gotta have lots of insurance in these companies to cover the people, the staff, the liability, the cargo. Your house is actually a cargo when we lift it. You have to have specialized insurance for this. You can't just call a contractor to come out with the bottle jacks anymore and lift up your house, because that actually lifts it like this, and you're going to repair every single window frame and every single door frame. This machine sets all the jacks, so you have a fireplace over here and a concrete slab over here and a wood frame in the middle. It sets the weights to all of the different weights, You throw a lever on this machine and you push one lever and all of the jacks work all at the same time. It's amazing to watch a concrete slab come out of the ground. So a wood house is just not that difficult. The concrete blocks are a little more difficult, but literally we can lift a concrete block house right off its foundation. We just have to use more beams together to keep the blocks all in place as we go up. Post-Sandy, we were amazed how many concrete block houses had siding on them, and we thought they were wood houses till we got into them looking at how to elevate them, and lo and behold, they were old concrete block post-World War II buildings. We have a lot of them in Florida, and so our industry's already lifted 5,000-6,000 of them in the Northeast after Sandy. They've always lifted them down here in Florida. Anyhow, simultaneous lift, as gentle as you can get. No house was ever built to be lifted or moved. We didn't program that into building them other than mobile houses, mobile homes. But it's a phenomenal process, and I encourage you all to look at some of the YouTubes that are out there. Our industry has a lot of these YouTubes out there. Here's a close-up of the machine. That machine operator is highly skilled, highly trained, multiple years of experience, and makes a very, very good salary. If you have children looking to get into this industry, our industry has to grow by 2,000% in the next 20 years to help all of you do this. We think there's 3 million of these buildings in America, and we're going to get it done. We're going to leave it stronger to our kids and their kids than we found it, that's for sure. Here's some other parts of it. The steel lifting beams, they're very thick flange steel, not like the construction steel for buildings. It's very, very thick and rigid and doesn't deflect very much when it's used as lifting. And then there's our cribbing blocks or shoring blocks, and some call them Jenga blocks, if you remember the old Jenga block game. So those are put under the structure. There's one of our hydraulic rams. That's a 15-ton ram. We actually have up to 50-ton rams. Those are really amazing. They're like this big. Remember, this is the industry that in 1992 moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. 5,000-ton solid brick, 500-foot high structure in Cape Hatteras. We lifted it off its foundation, rolled it 2,900 feet inland, set it on a new foundation, and had a hurricane with surge up to here. It was before I got into the industry, but that's what we're capable of. So lifting these smaller residential or multifamilies, we're even lifting apartments and condos now after Harvey down in the south part of Texas, 20, 30 rooms. We're lifting the whole structure up. It's truly amazing. Save them and reuse them. Here's a concrete slab. Look at that footing. That's a 4.5 foot deep footing that was probably 2.5, 3 feet wide on that structure. It had 2-inch marble floors throughout the house. All the furniture's still in it. We just lift the whole thing, and it's amazing, right? All the bricks stay on it. And we put a new footing and a new foundation, and those are the piers or the piles that we have to drive because our soils are so bad down there, and that's in the V zone. So you have to have piles beneath the footings. And we encapsulate those piles or piers into the new footings and bring the little walls up to the footing, dress everything with a stucco, and it's an elevated house. It's amazing. We've done 36,000 in Louisiana since Katrina. It's amazing. We're here. We're ready. So here's our steps. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it now. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's in your booklet, and I encourage you to contact me with any questions. I am always on the internet or on the phone talking to people. I just finished helping a woman and her husband in North New York, or Southern New York. After 4 years, they finally got their grant, got it finished, and they celebrated last year getting all done with this project. Hopefully it won't take you that long, but there were extenuating circumstances up there. But she got done, and she's really happy, and we followed all the way through. Elevation certificate. Firm did a great thing last year. Out of the 1 million plus pre-flood map buildings that the flood insurance program has on their books, the NFIP, remember it's never more than 30% of the community has the NFIP, so we think there's 3 times that many out there on the landscape, 3 million. We're missing 3/4 of the elevation certificate. So FEMA is setting those rates increases without really knowing where you're at. So elevation certificate, if you're you've got to have one. In my town, the realtors won't take a listing unless you have an elevation certificate. There's just too much at stake nowadays with the insurance changes. Soil boring. You gotta pay a guy to come out, bore the soil, so we know what's underneath the ground. You can't engineer and design the foundation till you know what you got underneath you. In New Jersey, it's horrible. They dug these canals, they threw all the muck up on top of the green stuff that was there, and it all compressed over the years. So you got these voids in the soil, and it won't bear heavily enough. So you have to run piles down through that to where you can get to firm soil underneath and then build your footing and slab up from there. So we've got to know what you're sitting on. You got to have a soil boring to design the foundation. If you're on a slab, you need to get to find out, if you're not on piers in a wood frame structure, if on a slab, say with a concrete block house or a wood frame house, you need to have that same structural engineer that's going to design your foundation come out and determine whether or not you can elevate that slab. Some slabs were built structural as a structural slab. Some have the separate footings and separate slab inside. You got to leave that behind and go up with the house. If the footing is big enough and strong enough, you can usually bring up a few courses of concrete block, put the flood vents in, set the house back down on that. Or what happens a lot of times is our older designs are not up to specifications or able to carry the extra weight. You have to eliminate the foundation and start from scratch with a new foundation. And we call them battleship foundations. They've got number 5 rebar in them. Every so many feet there's a stirrup wrap, and then when you come up for your piers, they actually bend up the rebars to come up out of the pour for the footing. And then there's grade beams across in between the footing to keep. So basically we're trying to prevent the scouring that I saw today up there in Big Pine, where that water starts getting under the foundation and the piers, and you start losing part of the structure. And the unified footing is the only way to go. So you got to have the determination whether that slab can come up or stay. Then you get construction drawings. Construction drawings are the only way we can accurately estimate these jobs. You're different from me. I'm different from you. We're all different. Your houses are all different. They've had additions. They're, it's a house. It's a unique thing. So you've got to get a set of construction drawings, and then you can shop it to the contractors. Our industry can either be a subcontractor or a prime contractor. We can do the whole thing soup to nuts as an industry, and that's usually in the grant programs that come after this. We'll talk about that. At this stage, though, we're often down into these communities that people want to go, and there's contractors all over the place. There's contractors that are already doing foundations. There's contractors that are doing the electrical, the plumbing. We want to work with them. We want to provide the specialized services. There's probably contractors out there that have a multitude of families that are already starting to look to lift, and they just need these specialized, highly skilled services. And so we'll come in, just provide those services, go out. When they get done with the foundation, we come back, lower the house, and they finish all the stairs and the stands for the air conditioners and all that stuff. So we work either way as an industry. I can tell you that there's a lot of work down here in the next 5 years. First, it'll be privately funded, and then the grant programs will come in, federal, FEMA and HUD grant programs. So we'll talk about those in a minute. Then you got to go shop your financing. Set of plans so you know exactly what the project's going to cost. You got to go to the bank. You got to get into the grant program. Some of the grant programs will reimburse you for the set of drawings, and some won't. You have to work with your local officials to understand the requirements of these grant programs that will be coming towards you. We had $1.8 billion for Katrina and Rita in Louisiana to elevate. It was a lot of money, and we elevated a lot of buildings. So hopefully we can get the Congress to do their job in the next few weeks and get that second supplemental. Don't be afraid to call your congressman and encourage them to pass that supplemental for us so we can help you. Because we still haven't passed the second supplemental for this disaster, and it was a $300 billion year of disasters. I mean, it was multiple hurricanes. So we've got to get a supplemental out of Congress to get these state programs stood up for disaster recovery. Then you execute the project. It's financing, planning, all the planning stuff, financing, execution, and then you get to live free of flood worries. These retired folks, a couple of families I've helped, They keep calling me every year after the hurricane. God, we evacuated and we came back and all we had to do was clean up and we're back in business. In our town, 3 days, and we're back. They're back on their decks having coffee in the elevated house. And I know you all want to be there. I know you all want to be there. So let's get you there, okay? All right, so here we go. Let's do dry flood proofing next. Not residential, but some of you may be business owners. Some of you may manage properties that are income producing, commercial or non-residential. These are the things that we have to be engaged with when we're doing dry flood proofing. There's a separate FEMA bulletin for that. The designers and engineers utilize that document as well as some other documents we'll go through in just a second. But we have to evaluate the risk, the flood depths, the structure. What we're trying to do is as dry as you can make that building with the flood happening, okay? Our U.S. submarines still have sump pumps in them because nothing is flood-proof. Water wins all the time. So you're trying to keep as much water out as you can. There's a limit to the water that you can get in the structure. You have to have a sump pump in the building to suck out that water and a permanent power source, because what happens in a storm? We lose power. So you got to have a separate power source for that sump pump. All of this is outlined in the TB3, Technical Bulletin 3, and now we have a new requirement. We have to install it once a year and take it out once a year. A lot of dry flood-proofed projects have failed under the storm, under the event, because let's say it was a retail shop, a dress shop, and you've got the third tenant in there and the panels are sitting in the back that you put on the front door and all this kind of stuff, and the gaskets may be compressed and they put them on and the water comes in and the place gets ruined, and they've had a really low insurance rate because they were certified that they were dry flood proofed. So dry flood proofing, they actually make you put it in and take it out once a year, and the engineer has to sign it off now. In Europe, they have a flood day. I encourage all communities to have a flood experience day, where they set up all these things in their commercial buildings and take them down and maybe barbecue and, make it an event. That's what all these European cities are doing now that have a lot of flooding, is they actually make a set up and tear down day for their flood proofing stuff. We have museums and hospitals that have storage where they have all these planks that go in front of the buildings, and they got to send the semi over and bring the stuff over, and they got to install it, and then they got to take it down, and they got to go store it again. That's kind of the thing that we're dealing with nowadays, because flooding's expensive. The downtime, the costs to business, we've got to be able to flood proof our buildings. And of course, new construction, they're building them up higher or have this flood proofing already in them. We're talking retrofitting the old buildings. I want to talk, so in our country, in our world, us humans, when there's a demand, there's innovation, right? We innovate things. We created computers. We have cars that are electric now. We're just incredible, us human beings. We got more than 2 or 3 of those brain cells up there, and we got these, and we do great things. So instead of just a rigid panel that you would have a series of panels stored in a warehouse somewhere, why don't you have a deployment system that's right on the building and you just pull it out like a curtain? So the guys that build the spacesuits, men and women that build the spacesuits for NASA, part of Florida's experience, they're now building a flexible curtain flood wall. I think it's so cool to talk about it because it's just taking our technologies to another level. They now have these curtains installed on all the tunnels in New York, all the subway covers in New York that you go down to the subways, because the subway's flooded, people can't get around, it's not a good thing. Now, this is at a power station where you actually have the curtain installed on one side of the opening. That's like for a truck or a vehicle. You pull it across, you clamp it down, and it'll hold back up to 12 feet of water. Amazing. It kind of bows in and deflects, and it'll take a telephone pole right into it and bounce it off. Space-age materials. Pretty cool. And then we have the aluminum stop logs, which are put between vertical balusters, and we slide the stop logs in, and they have rubber gaskets. So this has been the technology up to this point. Now we've kind of got these other soft goods. You have to price them into the building. You have to figure out what your losses would be if you flooded, what your increased insurance costs are as you go forward, because a lot of commercial buildings aren't going to get lifted. They're going to be dry flood proofed. So here's what the designers have to deal with. Okay, they got to deal with the flood insurance program, the engineering, I'm sorry, I should have blown those up. The blue document is called the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's their guidelines for all of these structural engineers on how to design in the flood zone. So you got to follow those, and you got to say on the plans that you followed those to get a permit. And then there's the international codes, which have the residential code and the regular commercial building codes. And those are changing every 2 or 3, 4 years. And you know, people talk about it like, oh, they're always changing the codes, but in reality, the changes in the codes are things that we've seen, that we're correcting, that we're making better and stronger for a future that really is going to be different than our past. So the designers have a lot to deal with on their plates when they're designing these foundations and how to become resilient and how to get these buildings designed to be certified so the flood insurance is lower and the risk is lower. So here's the funding. This is really probably one of the most important ones, and we're getting really close to the end, so thanks for bearing with me. Look forward to your questions. Pre-disaster and post-disaster. That's kind of how we do the funding descriptions. So you're in the post-disaster scenario, unless you're in Key West, because there wasn't much flooding in Key West, so you're in the pre-disaster kind of time frame and experiencing this. So no matter what, cash is always king. Cash gets you pretty much to the head of the line on the contractors. It's the quickest pay for the contractors, so the prices adjust accordingly. If you're in grant programs, typically the payments are delayed because it comes through government payouts, and so the prices are a little different during grant programs. But the cash is king. Cash always does it. If you have good equity position on your mortgage, you paid most of it off and you only have a little bit of mortgage left, you're actually in a good position. You can borrow this money. Nobody planned on this, and I know that that's what everybody's thinking right now is, God, I didn't plan on this. I didn't have this planned into the program, and I know that, and I've been there with you, and I've helped so many families through this. So we just gotta take 10 steps forward and then take a breath. That's what I tell everybody. 10 steps forward and take a breath. Find your faith, whatever that may be. God, nature, church, Muhammad, whatever. You got to have some faith in this process through, because you can rely on that. You can bank on that a little bit and lean on that. And then the FEMA has grant programs for those who've been flooded multiple times. We have 100,000+ now buildings in this country that have been repetitively flooded, and probably 10,000, 12,000. We don't have the final numbers now for this last couple of years, the severe repetitive losses, where we've actually paid out more for the structure than it's worth on the insurance claims. And we have some in Louisiana who've had 20, 30 payments. You know, we paid off the house 3, 4 times. Let's stop that. Let's just get it up, fix it, and keep moving, right? Keep moving. And there's the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant Program. So both of those are pre-disaster. The cities and counties can help you access those programs if you got the letter from FEMA saying you're a repetitive loss building. If you didn't have insurance and were flooded a couple of 3 times, you got to have the insurance to have that track record of the claims to be the repetitive loss building. And then there's the Federal Housing Administration. This is really exciting. FHA 203K. Write it down, check it out with your banker. This program's been around for over 40 years. My daughter used it. Single mother, working 2 jobs. Since 2008, you've got to have 30% down on a house now. Remember, we kind of got upside down on mortgages and all that mess, and so they now require 30% down. So she wanted a house for my killer little redheaded granddaughter, and so she was able to buy a little rundown house in a neighborhood. They gave her a construction loan for so much stuff, cabinets and flooring and painting, but you couldn't do foundations with it until Sandy came and flooded 600,000 buildings and 1 million voters. Remember, this is America. We vote. We have a vote, and we have a voice. So they changed the program, and now you can do foundations with the FHA 203K. You go in, they have a special appraisal. It appraises your house at like 130% of its value because they figure once it's fixed up over the long term of the mortgage, it's going to have more value. It gives you a construction loan that pays the contractor. You don't have to worry about writing checks and all that. It pays the contractor. There's a check and balance so that you get the work that you've contracted for, you know. We all have heard the horror stories. We've got great contractors, but there's a couple of bad apples in the group that come up in these storms. I hate it. So they pay the contractors, and then they convert it into a mortgage. And you can even take what's in your current mortgage and wrap that all together into a 30-year mortgage, understanding that over time, this investment is really worth it. Your value of your structure increases. So that's an exciting new program just since 12 at Sandy. 203K by the FHA. The banks write those loans and convert them to a mortgage. Post-disaster, cash again is king. Then there's the increased cost of compliance component of your flood insurance program policy. The good news is the NFIP, if it ever gets passed, because it's in Congress, we're trying to get it reauthorized. They've kicked the can down the road twice. Hear that Friday's the deadline for the budget, and they're going to kick it down the road again a little bit, we heard. But that's supposed to double to $60,000. And you're supposed to be able to get it once this legislation passes. Again, it doesn't hurt to encourage your elected official in the Senate. It's done with the House, and it's over in the Senate now. Call your senators' offices and encourage them to pass the NFIP legislation. It's supposed to go to $60,000 and be available not just when you get that letter from the code official that says you're 50% damaged, because once you're 50% damaged on the building, you have to come into compliance on the elevation of whatever flood map you're at, even if you're in a newer house that was built to a previous flood map, right, Scott?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm getting those facts right. So we're supposed to get $60,000, and whenever it floods. It's not in law yet, but that's what's supposed to pass, and you're a flood victim. And you're a constituent. Call your senator's offices and encourage them to get this done. Let's get it done and get it on the plate and get it on the. It's from your insurance company. It's part of your policy, and what you have to do is have a letter that you're substantially damaged from the code official, 50% damaged or more. You have to have a building permit. You have to have a cost estimate or a contract for the project. In the old days, they just send you $30,000. Well, it kind of ended up with some problems. Now, some will send you 15, and then 15 when you're done, get your certificate of occupancy. Some withhold all of it but they'll send you a letter saying you get the 30. So it's really good to take to the bank and say, hey, I can assign my benefit to the bank. My $30,000, I can sign a piece of paper that says, Mr. Banker, I'll sign that check over to you when it comes. So that's really a helpful deal. $30,000 20 years ago when they put it in place was $30,000. $30,000 now isn't $30,000 in the real world of contracting and construction. So they're going to kick it to double, which we're really excited about.
Rod,
But it's not in yet. Yeah, Scott.
when they kick it to double, are they also going to make it in addition to your maximum?
Yes. Right now, if you max out your policy at $250, you can't get the ICC. It was just never thought about back when they did this stuff. Now you'll be able to get your ICC and still tap out your policy at $250. So thanks, Scott, for that one. Okay, and then we'll go through these couple of others real quick. Post-disaster. As I said, the federal programs, you're going to get notices from your local government. Make sure you monitor the radios and your emails. But they're going to roll out these FEMA hazard mitigation grant programs and the HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Disaster Recovery Grant. The Disaster Recovery Grant usually gets rolled into a program that you sign up for. If you didn't have flood insurance, it'll help you repair your home. And if you're over 50% damaged, because you have to mitigate, it will fund that as well. So be alert for that. Again, we have to get this second supplemental out of the federal government. Everybody's waiting for it. I'm calling senators almost every other day in different states that got affected and saying, we got to get this going.
Rod, another
Yeah.
question. when they do that, let's say they do that Friday, right? Are people who've been damaged from this storm going to be eligible for that, or is that only going to be effective from the change date? Do you know?
On the ICC,
Yeah.
that hasn't been clarified yet. We're hoping to get them to rule retroactive to this year because we've had so much damage. The insurance has to work that out. NFIP and FEMA has to work that out. And then we've got the SBA. Everybody who signs up for the disaster with FEMA is encouraged to get a number for the SBA and a registration. We do it simultaneously, and I really encourage you, if you haven't passed the deadline, make sure you sign up for the SBA. The SBA will fund your rebuilding. It's a loan. It's not a grant program. The grant programs I should mention on pre-disaster have a match requirement, and usually if it's not too big a project, that ICC money will cover that match for you. The Small Business Administration, if you are 50% damaged or more and you have to become compliant, there's an additional $200,000 in there available to you as a loan to elevate your structure or dry flood proof it if it's a non-residential structure. Okay. So, let's talk about being elevation prepared as a community. And this goes over to the community side, the county side, and the state side of government. This is a very, very specialized form of construction. All of the parts of the construction after the elevation are standard construction. But elevating a structure is very unique, very specialized, and very not inexpensive for anybody, the contractors or the property owners. It really behooves the community and the county and the state to have a contractor registry of qualified contractors. We found out, okay, here's Louisiana, we had Katrina, and 30 days later we had Rita. I mean, we were still pumping New Orleans out when we had another Cat 3. Imagine that, just crazy. We got $2 billion of HUD money and CDBG money to elevate buildings. We had 7 contractors that could elevate before the storm. A year later, when the money starts hitting the ground, we had 150. And we had some homes damaged and destroyed, and we had some men killed. And that's not where you want to go as a state. You don't have a lot of experience in this yet, but you're gonna. You're gonna. And 5 years from now, we're gonna have thousands of these homes elevated. Criminal background check, simple criminal background check. If they've ever been prosecuted, they got to sign a form, an affidavit that says they haven't been criminally prosecuted, a contractor registry in both the county or community, and then at the state level. We have a list at the state in Louisiana for doing these grant programs, and they've been vetted, and they're professional, and they show up and do their job. New Jersey and New York had similar experiences, put in these guards within months because we out of Louisiana had come up and said, you know, this is what we got to do. You guys are the important ones, not these contractors. We got to make sure we have some qualifications for these contractors to do this work. Minimum insurance requirements, liability, workman's comp. You know, in Texas, there's questions whether or not they need workman's comp. No, this is construction. You need workman's compensation for the workers. Care and custody or riggers and cargo. Once that structure is off its original foundation or the foundation is up off the ground, no insurance covers it. It's a cargo. It's just as if it was a cargo for a ship or anything else. So liability doesn't cover it. Homeowners doesn't cover it. You got to have riggers insurance, and it really needs to be the replacement cost of the structure, just in case, right? You don't want to have an accident and only half the structure's covered. Cover our people is what I say. Variance processes. All of these older buildings were built before zoning, so their setbacks aren't conforming to the new zoning requirements. Side setbacks, front setbacks from the street, all of that. I mean, we driving around Key West today, we got a lot of them right up to the curb, and they were built in the horse and buggy days. So I did a project, or tried to do a project in North Florida, up near Tampa, and they required $5,000, a lawyer, and 90 days to get a variance, and they just didn't give them. Well, that's for new construction, okay? This is something different. We're just trying to get compliance so we can not flood. Communities like mine, 2 weeks, $100, goes through the review process so you can build your stairs encroaching into the setbacks, and let's move these projects to the front. Okay, I know it puts a lot of load on the zoning and planning commissions and the code officials and councils, but really streamline the variance process for flood elevations and make it simpler. And the permitting process, make sure that the contractors understand exactly what you need for permitting. Every community has different permitting requirements. When we were working the beaches up in New Jersey, imagine every 10 blocks there's another city. They have multiple communities within one barrier island, and they all required something different for their, just little differences, but we actually had to develop lists of a checklist for, okay, we're gonna elevate in this town, we gotta have this checklist done so we can get the permit, right? So make sure that the contractors have a ready understanding and there's a checklist available for elevation or something like that. Just let's all make it work easier and quicker because we're really not used to it. If you haven't done a lot of them, you're not used to it as a community. Pre-disaster elevations are only a flood mitigation or post-disaster. Unless you're 50% damaged and then you have some code issues with electrical and bringing things up to code there. But if you're just elevating a structure, let's say in Key West, that wasn't flood damaged because you know you need to and you're going to do that as an investment in your property, it's a compliance project with the floodplain. It doesn't require a whole new, we had communities in New Jersey that were requiring complete demolition of all of the utilities to the house, a new $10,000 sewer line, a new water line. Oh my God, just jacks up the price and complexity of the whole project. In Louisiana, we cut the sewer line, we cut the electric, no, we don't cut the electric, we disconnect the electric and disconnect the gas, and up we go. Do the work, set it back down, reconnect everything to code with a licensed contractor, and it's done, right? Makes a lot of sense. Let's be common sense about this and get them done. So steps to elevation, I believe we've got it in the kit. Is that right, Carolyn? The little steps to elevation is in your homeowner's guide. Should be easy to follow. I've vetted it through a lot of different areas. If you have any questions, contact Carolyn, contact me. She'll put you in touch with me. We'll help you. We'll guide you. We'll talk to you, okay? I mean, this is one house at a time, and we've got 3 million of them, so hopefully I'll have some help in a couple of months. And I'm almost done. This is our moonshot. We have a challenge in this generation. We cannot leave it this way for our children. We will do it because it's not like going to the moon. Just get them elevated, get them done, get on safe with life. So that's our challenge to you, and our challenge to us is to get this done. And we're here to help. And I hope this was good information for you. I am going to be here until your questions are all done tonight. Come on up. I do want to introduce Tyler. Tyler came a little late. He came out of Miami, and there was a mess at the car dealership, and he's here. I invited Tyler to come down and do a special thing that the SmartVent company offers for free at these kinds of seminars. If you have an elevation certificate with you tonight or have access to your elevation certificate because you had the program last year, if you went to the program, he has a computer and a software that will actually give you the options for your structure. They've created this software. It's free tonight. He'll be in the back, and you can actually tell him how high your building is, what flood zone you're in, and he can compute out a little report that basically tells you your options as a homeowner on your home. So I wanted to introduce Tyler from SmartVent Corporation. He's going to be back there where Carolyn's sitting with his laptop as we go through these questions, because believe me, I've stayed for 2.5 hours for these before, and you're all going to have questions. So any other thoughts, Scott? Do you want to say something as we get?
Just a word of caution that some people encountered problems with getting SBA loans this time. And if you received any assistance from FEMA, there's usually a requirement that you maintain flood insurance for X amount of years. Well, we had people after Wilma that got like $400 worth of assistance from FEMA. They didn't keep the insurance policy in place for the next couple of years. So when this storm happened, they went to the SBA because they had severe damage this time. They could not get the SBA low interest loan because they didn't meet the insurance requirement for when they got that $400 from Wilma. So if you did get assistance, it's very important that you keep that coverage in the following years. It's
Wait
live.
just a second. I think Allison's trying to. I don't know if you're.
It's
There we are.
I'm out anyway. Two questions. One, have you worked in any states that have fees but for storm and flooding things?
No, you guys are. It's unbelievable what's maybe going to happen in the legislature within this session in Tallahassee. How many are familiar with PACE? Have you ever
We
used
don't
that?
have it here yet,
Oh, you don't have it here yet. Okay, the
but we're about to.
PACE financing is outside of the traditional banking system financing, okay? When we started doing solar panels and energy retrofits on our homes, banks were a little leery to get in on that, and a new system of financing, it's not Bitcoin, okay? It's a new system of financing where investors have seen an opportunity, they have bonding with the state to protect. Basically, they're funding it and financing the project on your property that then gets attached to your property taxes, not your mortgage or an equity loan. And every year you pay a payment on that. When you go to sell the property, some banks will accept that, and some banks require you to pay that off because it's kind of outside the banking system. But we needed this financing system and in order to get this thing going. So we put in a bunch of solar panels, and we put in home energy retrofits and windows, storm shutters, all sorts of stuff. Then about 5 years ago, because wind has become a very real issue for all of us at the coast, right? Wind insurance, the wind retrofits, the screws into the plywood on your roof, the clips, the Simpson clips to clip all the house together so the roof won't peel off. All of that stuff then became eligible for financing through this form of financing. And for the first time, I understand it was either introduced this week or is due to be introduced.
I don't know if it was or not.
We could have financing based on your property value. Remember, in Florida, property values are very high. The building value has, especially if it's an older building, has less value. So it's hard to get that financing through the traditional. We may have a financing system on board by the end of the legislature. We'll see. Again, don't be shy. Encourage your state legislators to look at this, especially post-disaster, especially if you have a pre-flood map home. Let's do this together. Our industry is looking at this. I can tell you there's probably 4 or 5 of our companies there's one company that's looking at a building in Big Pine right now to locate in to start doing these elevations with or without PACE. But our companies are looking logistically. Just like they moved into Houston. We moved 8 companies into Houston, our industry did, within the last 3 months to start elevating buildings. Demand is there. The industry will respond. Let's get this financing in place. So thanks for the push on the PACE thing.
Well, so our county, it's PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy, PACE, has been authorized in Florida for about 10 years now, but individual local governments have to opt into it. So Monroe County has been going down those steps, and it should happen within the next couple of months. It'll still be a little bit longer after that for the program to actually be established and working, but it allows you to get another different line of credit, but through the equity in your home, through your property taxes. So you pay it back in your assessments rather than a loan payment or something like that. But it still is a loan, but it's done through your property taxes. And then my second question was, I've also been working with another group that's doing more kind of like solar co-op buying, not necessarily as a co-op of, that we provide energy for each other, but just in 10 different people band together and ask for a service to get a better price on that service they're asking for. And have you seen that in the elevating? Because a lot of what you're doing is the mobilization of that equipment back and forth. So it would make sense that you'd give a better price if you're coming down for 30 homes all in one go than just one guy here and one guy, 3 months from now.
Simple market economics. Yeah. I looked at 3 houses in Coral Gables, really low-lying area, got 4 feet of water, and all their old historic houses right south of Miami on my way down here. And they're all looking to go together, and they want a discount, and they're going to get a discount because there's an empty lot right around the corner, and we can put our steel beams there, and we can just stage them. Basically, lift one, start the foundation work, lift the next one, pour the first foundation, we're starting the foundation work, and we just boom, boom, boom. You're a little more spread out in most of the keys, but if you have a homeowners association, condos, another big deal. A lot of condos are starting to go up. We have 2 or 3 condo units in Galveston area, south of Houston, going up now with the slab and everything. My town did 4 fourplex condos, 12 feet in the air with the slab 2-3 years ago with a grant. Actually, they were severe repetitives. Numbers of people going together simultaneously will reduce your price.
Are there any elevation companies in Florida?
Yes. Ducky Johnson, who's paying my way down here to help. They're up near the Georgia border. They are opening a Jacksonville office within a week or so, and they're trying to get finalized on a big pine building right now. We have several others in Florida. We have probably 5 or 6 elevation companies up on the mainland. There are none in our association. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be an elevation company and not be part of the International Association of Structural Movers, which is our international group of professional contractors. But most of the elevations here have been an outside contractor from east coast of Florida coming down and doing them. Although I understand there's been some locally elevated structures as well with the individual jacking method. Make sure that insurance is in place. Yes.
One of your slides said $100,000 for the machine and $250,000 for the employees.
Well, for the whole rig, everything.
My question is that a cost to the property?
No, that's our investment as an industry to show up at your door. It's about $250,000 per crew per machine.
Can I assume that that's a very minimum beginning level of where it would cost me as a property owner?
Oh, no. The elevation costs, I can tell you what, the East Coast is very expensive because they can only build so many months out of the year, and then in the January.
Give me a bracket, like what the lowest you saw.
Wood frame house, 4 feet in the air with a new foundation can be around $70, $71, $72 a foot. Concrete slab house, elevated 12 feet in the air is roughly $120 to $140 a foot. Per square foot finished of the footprint of the house. I'm just giving you the extremes. The slab house is the hardest to do. Slab separation is the next, where we take it off of the foundation, build a new foundation, put a wood floor in it, and put it down on that. And then the wood frame structure is the least expensive for us to do. So in the 60s, that's total project cost per square foot of the house. New construction here is running what for a good house, or a mid-level house?
250.
Mobile homes are very, very easy to elevate. Don't take that much. One of the big issues we've got here is concrete supply. A lot of it's going to the military operations and stuff. We only have a couple of batch plants. I anticipate another batch plant down here, probably a mobile batch plant within a couple of years to manage the foundation demands. Labor is a big issue down here. You all know it. We all know it. We lost a lot of labor housing. I think some of the elevation companies are looking at bringing trailers down and putting them in the parks and housing their main labor force, not the electricians and plumbers, but because they're here already. And once you're on the repair curve, you're repairing now. Once those repairs are done, those contractors are going to want more work. They won't be as busy as they are now. So they'll be a little, if you tried to get them now, your pricing's going to be higher because they're booked for 6 months out. But after that, there'll be more energy from them to be working. And so price is an issue down here, but not construction period of the year. That's up to the state and the local communities. It's always regulatory. I can tell you from experience that the general contracting license for Florida is the most rigid requirements in the nation. You got a great general contractor requirements here. Not all of them will be general contractors. Some may just come in and just want to lift for the general contractors. So you have to make sure that they have a Florida general contractor's license for whatever level. You know, in Louisiana, it's a heavy contractor and then a home repair contractor, 50,000, and then it's 100,000. So you have to do your homework, understand what the contractor requirements are in the state if it's based on budget. And I'm not familiar with those enough yet to give you all that counseling, but they can be a general contractor if they've got the general contractor's license, or they can be a subcontractor. And you yourself as a homeowner can be the contractor for your job if you're doing one project in most states. Is that how we do it here, Steve? Can the homeowner be the general contractor?
Oh.
I know you're floodplain instead of...
Yes.
Okay. Most
And
communities can.
typically what happens is you hire a general contractor who does the work for you, and he hires the elevation company. It gets really sketchy, and I've seen it done here where some local contractors, one or two of them, will get some bottle jacks and start going around the house. And when he said make sure the insurance is in place, talking about the workman's comp and the liability for that contractor, because those contractors I've seen doing that, their insurance lapses frequently.
You want a declaration page, a current insurance declaration page from that company that covers the riggers, cargo, and the liability workman's comp. Yeah, let's go to the back, all the way in the back, and then I'll come back this way. Uh-huh.
Has anybody approached the Historic Architectural Review Committee about raising these historic houses? And if so, because of our height requirement, how is that going to affect it? I actually looked into raising my house, and then I heard that the flood maps were going to change again. So I could spend all this money lifting my house as much as they say I could lift my house, and then in a year, they change the flood maps, and I'm back in the same situation that I was in before.
Actually, if you elevate your house to the current flood map, regardless of what map is coming or when it's coming, the current approved flood map, when those flood maps change, you are grandfathered into the new maps. Unless you're substantially damaged again, then you have to go to the new map compliance. And if you were a historic structure, you may have gotten the variance from having to elevate. Is that okay? You just didn't have to elevate? Okay.
I did the same thing.
That was a long time ago. Yeah. Well,
What is the historic or architectural committee? Can they regulate this? And if so, has anybody went and spoke to them about it? Like how? Because we have a height law too. So in Old Town, so if you have a two-story structure and then you raise it up and you're over the height law, that has anybody?
Scott, you want to take this one? Or
I'm here.
hey, oh,
I'm here.
I'm here. She's here.
Hi. I'm next to me is one of the HART commissioners, and I'm Benito Regros. I'm the HART planner. Many of the historic houses in the historic district has been elevated, including I can just the highest one that had been elevated is just like next to the Womankind on the corner of Truman, David Wolkolsky house. It was elevated almost 4 feet. It was 3 feet something. It was approved by HARC. So HARC is approving. We have been approving many elevations of many houses. What we definitely, they need to go through HARC. They need to go through the process. And what we look is just like to make sure that what is elevated is not like up to a point that, I'm sorry, but I don't think that we're going to allow people just like to parking underneath the houses here. But definitely, yeah, we have been approving. Actually, on the next meeting, HART meeting, there are going to be 2 buildings that are requesting to be elevated. So that is one thing. We definitely require just like a complete application and plans showing how the building is going to be elevated. There is another thing that I wanted to correct regarding variances. When you have a building that is historic or a non-historic building that is non-conforming, that means that the building doesn't comply with actual zoning regulations. If you're just like going to elevate it, even in the same location, we're not requiring variances.
Great.
Okay?
Even if the
So
stairs come into the setbacks and things like that.
what we do with the stairs is just like something then, because we need to make sure that they're just like within your property, because that is one of the problems that we're having, that a lot of people, when they want to elevate their houses, they have steps towards the front, so the steps are going to be into the city. So HARC it's just like allowing people to put them on the side.
Oh, the side of the house.
Yeah, because really, I mean, most of the historic district is on the X zone. That is a reality. Still, there are people on the X zone that have been requested elevating the houses, because there's many houses that are just like on grade, and those houses need to be elevated at least just like to have just like that separation between grade and their first floor. So yeah, answering their question, HARC, yes, we're just like reviewing them, and we're allowing them. Again, we're not going to allow our building to be elevated like 9 feet in order just like to put a cart underneath or to put an addition under it. But yes. And one thing that I wanted to ask you, and very nice meeting you.
Yes, we've conversed and emailed and hopefully get a meeting together, yes.
Yes. When it comes to the 50% substantial improvement, it's good to clarify that when a house is listed as a contributing resource or it's a historic resource, then it's exempt of that 50%. That is one of the good things that we have on these many houses. A lot of people cannot do renovations on their properties when they are historic, because if not, they will just like hit that 50%. So in that sense, I think that this is something that really needs to be addressed.
At the community level.
The other part of her question had to do with the building height requirement. And there are a number of people in this room that helped get that referendum on the ballot about 2 years ago. So we have a lot more working room now than we did before. So because we foresaw that people were going to get scrunched, because as you tried to lift from the bottom, you got squeezed from the top. So we have a lot more latitude, particularly with existing homes. Didn't want to get into that.
And real quick, I just wanted to add that this is not the only community that's dealing with this. I was just in Charleston 2 months ago. Charleston's had 3 floods in 3 years, multi-million-dollar homes, third recovery. The city actually wasn't allowing them to elevate. They made them take the variance, which the variance, if you take the variance, you're subject to the flood insurance increases because you're still non-conforming to the height requirements for the insurance. So basically, the citizens worked with the local government, and now they're going through a planning process to have design guidelines, which are so important for communities to have some set of measurable criteria for when, because every building's different, as you know, that's a wonderful thing about our historic buildings. And so in our community, now the columns on the porches have to line up with the columns underneath in the front so that we don't have offset. They used to just do them engineering requirement wise, and now they line those porch columns, and that carries the load anyway. And so it was a modification to the engineering side of design into making it much more aesthetic. In addition, we, in the beginning, probably Louisiana did 10,000 strictly engineered elevations, which left us naked concrete block piers. Now in our community, we put brick facades on them, we stucco them, we paint them, we do anything but naked concrete block or naked poured columns, and it made all the difference in the world. And we encourage communities to learn from those of us who've been working at this longer and how we've learned to look at that. And in fact, the American Planning Association this year is in New Orleans, their conference, and they're doing a field trip to our city. And you can actually see the early versions, and then the latest 7 storms, we had different people going at different times, and we still have these private elevations going between storms. So we've really learned what a lot of communities are going to learn if they don't learn from those, if we don't learn from those who've already gone there. And so unfortunately, our historic buildings are in the bullseye of these changes. They are higher risk, and so the insurance is going to be more, so we have to adapt them. And just finally, adaptation is something that historic buildings have done eternally. This is just visual. It really is visual. But you come to our community now, and for 4 blocks back, it's pretty similar. We were really worried about the difference. You know, you have 3 up and 4 down, or 1 up in the middle of 4. But eventually, they all get to where they have to. And it's all based on geography. This island is a hump in the middle. And as soon as you get 4 or 5 blocks out, just outside or just at the edges of the historic zone, the elevations are lower, and so those buildings will have to come to a certain elevation in order to be financially performing and able. But thank you for coming tonight, and I really look forward to I actually drove around with the Historic Survey today and looked at the mid-century stuff down on Staples and some of those avenues. So yeah, it was great. So blue shirt, and then right behind him. Yes.
I don't know if we got a couple questions or a couple comments or whatever, but I'm just speaking in real life and what my situation is.
Yes, sir.
And how we balance this out. I mean, if you look at this and say, hey, my house is in a low-lying area, it could be flooded, and it's a whole separate issue. I need to elevate my house. Let me go through this process and do it. But in reality, I believe that most of us are reacting to events that have happened to us. So we're not only dealing with catastrophic event. My particular situation, I got 4 foot in Wilma, and I got about a foot in Irma. I'm in my primary residence in a residential house.
Okay.
So here I'm elevating, and it's obviously the best scenario. I love where I live. I don't want to move. I raised my family there. I want to stay there.
Right.
Okay?
It's your community.
Now I'm in a situation where I'm settling with my insurance company, and what I can't understand is that this is my second claim within over a 10-year period, and I'm like, well, what are you going to do to help me mitigate the flood? And I can't really get clear answers. I did get a little bit of information on what's the cost, compliance, insurance. That's still very vague to me. But here I am, 3-4 months after the storm. I've got 2 checks sitting in my office, and do I settle with the flood? Because I told my wife, I said, I mean, this is the second time I've gotten impacted. Luckily, we minimize our damage, but I told my wife, I'm not putting a dime in my house until I've mitigated the flood. Yeah. So here we are juggling with, because I'm speaking for myself, but I believe the majority of people that I know and work with or live around have mortgages. You know, we're not in a situation, we have high mortgages. It's the highest cost of living in Florida, including insurance and all that. So here we are, okay, I've got a high mortgage, flood, insurance proceeds that I figure out to do it. And what I can't understand, if they know it's in a flood low-lying area, theoretically, they just want you to, you got the bank, which is the co-signer on the bank, and you,
For the insurance check.
insurance check,
Yeah.
you cannot get those proceeds unless you do the improvements. So I was thinking to myself, why am I gonna put improvements in this house to get it back to where it was, which is still flood prone, and have them continue to look over my shoulder, which I think is money not well spent. And then going, okay, well, I need to elevate my house. So how am I going
How do I do that
to,
too?
juggle all those balls at one time? Because I feel the longer, you know, I came to a meeting 12 years ago, and I had some information.
After Wilma?
After
Okay,
Wilma.
yeah.
Oh, that was the flood of the century. Well, it wasn't the flood of the century. There was just more to come. And then the king tides affect my house.
Okay.
The rising tides. So it's just, I got all these balls out there and trying to figure out which one to juggle. And also, just the numbers, unless I'm wrong, the numbers that you have said to mitigate or elevate a concrete block house, which I have, 2 of them, is over $100 a square foot.
What square footage are you on your footprint? 1,200,
My
1,400?
living space is 1,800.
Okay. 2-story or just 1 story? Okay, so it's one of the larger concrete blocks. I looked at a 1,200 a couple of days ago.
So $100 a square foot, it's $180,000 to mitigate that?
You really need to get a budget estimate. You need to have somebody work with you. Right, no, and I can't give estimates tonight. I mean, somebody has to show up at your house and start help working with you. I mean, it's really, well, I'm just saying I'm here till Saturday morning. I got to leave at 5 o'clock for Marathon to get up north. But I've been in Charleston. I've been in Jersey Shore, the New York Shore, the Connecticut Shore. I've been in Louisiana and Texas too. You are unique, and your house is unique, and you have unique personal circumstances. That's the way everybody is, and it's the way I am with my house. So I would offer that while I'm here, that I'm going to be back down here in Key West Friday, and I would certainly come to your house and take a look, give you some budget estimates based on your construction and your house and what looks like might need to happen. So at least you have a budget estimate. That's not going to be a contracting estimate, but it'll be this is your house, this is how, do you have an elevation certificate? Because then we have to, if you haven't had a survey done yet and an elevation certificate, you got to get that done, because that tells you how high you are, and your flood insurance is actually much more accurately set with a elevation certificate than if you don't have one.
And
And
you come out and you open your front door and there's salt water in the street in front of you.
I know. Miami Beach residents doing a lot of that too.
Before we get to another question, in order for the question and answer to properly come out on the TV, you need the microphone.
Okay.
How long is your your elevation certificate good for? Because I have one from 1999. Is that still a go, or that's still okay?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the earth is the
The
elevation
same.
it is, and your
Okay.
house is the elevation it is. They change them every 3 years to add some more information on them, but I understand Scott's really the king here for that one, and so.
It's a little bit disorientating, because on the top right of the form, it has an expiration date. That's for the form itself. It's not for a completed elevation certificate. So we still at the city accept elevation certificates from the 80s as long as nothing has changed.
Yes, we have one over here, and then we have one in the blue here. Wait, you got to use the mic. We'll try and get that on. Thanks.
Several years ago, I went to one of these meetings on sea level rising, and we looked at the area where my home is, and I fortunately will in 2035 not be in the flood zone for sea level rise. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get to it.
Because of other areas.
Because of the other areas, the roads.
Yeah.
You know, I need to canoe home. What are we going to do? I have really two questions. Assuming flood levels are what they're predicted to be, let's say Miami, where what, in 20 years, 80% of the property is going to be underwater or whatever it is. Are we fixing something that's going to be another problem? Are we fixing something that's going to have another problem that's not going to have anything to do with wind damage or flood damage? It's going to be sea level rising. And secondly, are we doing anything on the public side? I mean, let's assume that's not public, and I know a lot of it is, but with our infrastructure, so that if we do invest $170,000, add it to our mortgage, that on the public side, we're going to fix the roads, raise the roads, or build whatever flood containment walls we need to build so that this investment's worth the money we're putting into it.
Let's see if I can make this work again. Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at that and have been for, I've been with the city 5 years now, and even before that, we were looking at both the city and county level. For our main infrastructure, we're looking at the risks and vulnerability of those, finding the places that are already too low and shoring those up. Anything new that gets built, one of the things we look at before we design what needs to get built is what it's supposed to be in 30 years from now, 60 years from now in our planning horizon. So we are doing that on the infrastructure level. We've been adapting to sea level rise since we've been down here. We've just didn't have that name for it. But we've got the longest running tidal gauge in the Western Hemisphere, and we've got the gauge showing how much it's been rising over the last 100 years. So everything, everybody can probably remember back to an area that used to flood a lot, but we did various stormwater improvements in that area, and it alleviated that. So our worst areas now are what were, not a big deal a while ago. A lot of that is just stepwise, keeping us above water for a little bit longer. But this is where we live, and this is where we've put our investment in. And if we can, even if in the end it all goes underwater, we'll have had as long as we could and done it the right way. I'm staying.
Yeah, I've got a ground level wood frame house, about 1,000 square feet, in a V zone, right on the beach almost. And it's old, it started as a tiny little Cuban house, and it's just been added on, and I would be concerned. I mean, we're going to either replace it or elevate it.
Right.
Now, I'm just concerned. I guess you'd have to have some engineer come in and see whether it could take the strain of being elevated. I mean, that's what concerns me about it. I would do it, but it just worries me that you just lift it up and the sides would fall off it or something. Would you just need somebody to check it out first? I mean, I'm sure you would, but I mean...
That's part of the development of
where you go start from, right?
Have that evaluated first.
Yeah.
The foundation and the structure, can it handle it? I just finished last year moving a house that was built in 1699 in Connecticut. We took the roof off with the upper chimney, and we moved the lower part with a 3-hearth 20-ton chimney and moved it 5 miles up the road on 2 different rigs, put it back together, rebuilt the chimney with Irish masons, and she sits on a hillside now, safe and sound for another 400 years, we hope. There's very few structures that are so deteriorated that they need basically deconstruction or demolition. I have seen structures shored up internally, externally, banded with steel cables and corners, solid masonry buildings moved and relocated. America relocates more structures, and that can be elevation or relocation because you're still moving them. You still have to do the work to elevate, to move, except put wheels underneath it to move it. We do more structures than any other nation in the world, and we always have. The entire block of Michigan Avenue was elevated at one point in Chicago because it was too low to get the sewer line to the lake. Thank goodness we don't send the sewer directly to the lake anymore. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, 5,000-ton structure. When it was built, it was 2,900 feet from the shore. When it was moved, it was 150 feet from the shore. And when they set the foundation back again, on its foundation, they had a hurricane that was up to here, a half mile inland for the surge. So we would have lost that structure. I'm confident that if your structure is bad enough to not move, you should be red tagged and torn down. And I don't think your structure is that deteriorated. So
no, we survived. We survived the hurricane with minimal house damage.
It's an old house that's got some creaky joints and may have a little termite damage. You can replace a sill beam if it's timber framed, or a sill plate before you move it. Shore it up and elevate it. It's much less aggressive on a structure to just elevate, replace the foundation, and gently set it back down than it is to relocate a structure. So I'm confident that if you're still living in it and it's, not literally almost falling down on you, it takes a lot for a structure to fail completely. I mean, it does. Structures stay leaning like this for years and years and years, and I'm sure yours isn't. So I would be confident that you could go forward at least and get an engineering evaluation of your structure first. By the way, we really believe in our industry that there's a whole training program that should be provided to your architects and engineers down here. We have specialists all over the country that, we've done 36,000, so it's much more familiar to them to do this process. And there are things that we look for, and our industry is very interested in having multiple engineers trained up on how this works in your area and all the way through the Keys. Remember, there's $1 trillion of construction work and 3 million buildings in this country that are below the flood elevation. And as the ocean rises, that flood elevation rises. We've got to adapt or we become the dinosaurs. And I refuse to be a dinosaur, and I'm going to leave it stronger to my child. And yes, the historic buildings will adapt or they won't make it. And I pray that we get them all adapted and they look good and they're good for 2 generations, 3 generations until that water gets here. In fact, our families, these are family-owned, operated companies. They have multiple generations. They bring their children up through and they take over and run them. So many of our elevation company current leaders, presidents, owners, are telling their children that we will elevate this generation. I'm 60. I got 5 grandchildren. I've got one more on the way. We're going to elevate and relocate. And then as the water overtakes our society, we're going to relocate these buildings. We're not going to leave them as in Atlantis. Buildings have value, and we're going to put them on barges and take them to the mainland or whatever. We will be gone, but between now and then, they will be sellable, they will be usable, they will be safe from disaster. We've got 3 more generations here, I think. 62 mortgages at least. I'm not a chicken in the sky is falling guy. I'm a let's get her done. So, sorry.
So if I wanted to get it evaluated, what would the next step be? Just is there somebody?
I left a house today. I forgot my backpack. I turned back around after looking at 3 more houses in Big Pine. Came back and he said, I'm on my 3rd structural engineer. I'm talking to him now. We're going to have him out here starting to evaluate my building. I said, there you go. Let's just start doing this.
So just start calling.
You got to have a structural engineer evaluate your structure. And if you don't like what they say or they're not comfortable, interview them over the phone first. Have you ever looked at an old structure? How familiar are you? And that's why I think we need some training down here for architects and engineers on what we do so that we can get more ready to go. Because if there's one down here that's doing all the projects, there's way too many projects for that professional. There's work for everybody to make it safe. One more? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I live in Big Pine.
Okay.
And I just got my letter yesterday.
Substantial damage
Substantial
letter?
damage,
Okay.
yep. At FEMA, they called me the perfect storm because I have insurance. So I don't qualify. And
You don't qualify for?
I don't qualify for FEMA. I was turned
for
down.
the individual assistance.
For assistance, I didn't qualify. I was turned down for an SBA.
Remember, you reapply.
Yeah.
I know.
And
I know.
I've
It
got a
shouldn't work that
home
way.
that's before the storm was worth $600,000, and now after the storm, I'm going to have to rebuild. I've had 2 engineers out,
Okay.
and I'm in an all-concrete subdivision.
Okay.
So
Concrete block?
concrete
Okay.
block. So one said that my piers aren't strong enough to build on top. What do people like me do? Because I represent a lot of big piners where
I was just out there today.
we don't have the money, though,
Right.
to the SBA money coming in. Do I live in my trailer for 5 years and wait for a grant?
No, no, no.
Do
Let's
I-
work through this together. I mean, there's an industry out here that's willing and ready to help you. I'm here until Saturday morning at dawn. I leave for Fort Lauderdale and fly home. Thank God I'm not there tonight. It's 18 degrees there and snowing in New Orleans tonight. There you go. And so I had my neighbor wrap my outside pipe. I forgot to wrap the other night.
But
I
we're
am here,
looking-
and I'll come over there tomorrow morning if
We're
you want.
looking at just selling our property
No,
because
no. You got some other decision
there's
points.
just not enough money to rebuild.
Let's
there's not enough money.
put it on yellow paper. Let's put it down. Yays and nays, or pluses and minuses. I know where you're at. I've been with you guys forever, 20, 30 years. You're the next one. So take my card. I'm staying at the Hyatt place, and I can be over there in 30 minutes tomorrow morning before I go up to Key Largo. Okay? I'll come. If you want to have some of your neighbors there, we'll look at 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, it's a whole street. We're all demolished.
Okay. They're all gone?
They're all the same as mine.
Okay. Oh, they're all substantially damaged.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, like we said earlier, there's a company going to locate right on Big Pine. It looks like the first of probably a couple, 2 or 3. They happen to be the first one that's already looking at some buildings.
Okay.
You get 2 or 3 or 4 of you together, there's substantial savings to be had there on your elevation project, and I need to come see it.
Okay.
Really, with my eyes. I'm not an engineer, but I've done 1,500 of these, and we can look at the little computer program that says you're how many square feet and how high you. Do you have an elevation certificate for the policy?
I have one in right now. They're working on it. I know
Good.
where I'm at verbally.
Okay.
He's told me.
Then let's start from there. There's a graph and a chart,
Yeah.
and so much per square foot, and we can get
But
you your
my
budget
question
started, so
is,
then you can.
How do people pay for all this? Do you have to wait for the grant? Because it sounds like the grant's going to take 5 years down the road.
Oh, no.
Okay.
The government-funded grant programs never take more than 24 months to roll out. They may take 3 years to accomplish all the people. Remember, they had in Sandy and Jersey, they had 20,000 people in grant programs,
Okay.
30,000 people, 150,000 flooded buildings, so 200,000 flooded buildings. So
So I just
I can come the
misunderstood.
next 2 days. I'm here. I'd love to come to your place. Just get a card from me. Let's call me or email me, and we'll set a time, and I'll come
Thank
to your place. Yeah. Any more thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Just a quick thought. I was at the county flood postmortem meeting here last week, and they're signing up county residents for whatever grant assistance comes down the road. And so if you could get a hold of I think it's the strategic planning director for the county or the county's sustainability person, and name again?
Rhonda Haig is the county sustainability person, and she's actually on the adaptation angle of looking at what we can do.
So they are trying to get themselves positioned for the grant situation. On the SBA loans, I would certainly go back now that you received the letter, because that may change your circumstances with the SBA and make sure they understand where you are. Because after Wilma, I got an SBA loan, and once my house was determined to be substantially damaged, it really opened the thing up a little bit, and they were much more helpful, and the amount of money that they offered also increased. So
Has the SBA gotten any kind of consumer advocates, people that help through the appeal process? I'm not familiar with this disaster. I know after Sandy, a lot of things changed. A lot of things changed at FEMA and NFIP and insurance industry, and SBA is still a little cloudy to me, but I have heard that people can often go back once or twice on appeal. I don't think there's a limit of appeals. Provide more information. I know at the NFIP they've created an Office of Consumer Advocate that is in DC that you can actually interface with on your flood insurance. I don't know if the SBA has a consumer advocate or public advocate, but let's figure out a way to help you with the SBA portion. That's the missing thing in these disasters is everybody's got so much, both on the government side and the human side, the impacted human side, the property owners. There's, yeah.
So what did your bank say? Modifying your mortgage or something like that?
No, can I just say something? After Wilma, this is like the same scenario, because when Wilma happened. I'm sorry, when Katrina happened to you, Wilma, right after that, Wilma happened to us.
It was 05, yeah.
And we didn't have the proper people here giving us our FEMA claims. We had, as a matter of fact, I had a guy from the Department of Transportation in California doing my FEMA claim.
Right.
Because all the adjusters were in
Completely
Katrina.
deployed just like they are now.
Now, the same thing here, we have the same situation after Houston, where all of the SBA people and all of the FEMA people are in Houston, and this happens to us. So I kept on with the SBA and SBA and SBA and SBA, and I was in a very similar situation, and I know that desperately awful feeling. But I did prevail in the end, but I did have to get a private insurance adjuster to help me get through the FEMA thing.
The
Because
NFIP part
they
of
just
it,
wouldn't listen to anything I had, and I had like 2 feet of water in my house.
It's gotten much better. I mean, we've got some insurance agents in the house tonight, and since Sandy, we've improved our system. We've really got a better way to do this process. SBA is a little cloudier, but I know that I've spoken with staff at SBA about the mitigation loans, so I have a contact at SBA. I'll make a call while we're there. I mean, just it's about helping each other. It's about helping us through the process, and maybe that'll work, and that'll be a story for your 5 neighbors too. So we're going to get together by Friday. So.
Now that you've got your letter also, you've got to start the ICC, increased cost of compliance claim. You're at the 250? Okay.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you qualify?
Because she's already at the maximum amount payable under her policy.
If you're at 250 claim, you don't have any room in your policy for that 30,000. The new legislation is supposed to put the ICC outside of the maximum of your claim and double it. So let's look at some of these issues. Like I said, yellow pad them. Let's start putting this stuff down. This is the beginning of the next steps. Let's do it that way.
So my interpretation is that she had insurance, but she was uninsured.
Well, no, she had insurance, but she maxed her policy coverage at 250. If your claim goes up to 220, you can still get the 30,000 because that's the max of your policy. The new legislation takes that ICC out of that cap.
All of her damages were not covered by all of her insurance policies.
Is that right? Yeah, because you had a high value home.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
And I really.
I look forward to coming out and seeing your place, and we're going to talk about all this.
The lady in the back had a really good point when she talked about we're revisiting again what we experienced in the past with second or third tier people coming in to do these claims. And with the city, when I'm after money from FEMA to rebuild something that was damaged, my motto is keep asking, until you get somebody that says yes. And I would say 90% of the time that works. Because I've asked 5-6 times for the same thing, and inevitably I've gotten somebody who said yes. So don't give up on a denial. Don't give up on a rejection of appeal. Keep appealing until you just exhausted every single option.
And in fact, I know that congressional offices have helped and assisted when you have an issue with the federal government in a program. Say you're a veteran and you need some help in the Veterans department or something, they very often will assign a staff person to look into your situation, and they'll contact the agency and provide a liaison to help you. And so there may be that option. I'm not saying it is, but maybe. So all of these forums are important, and having forums and having discussions to find where the hiccup is in the program is really important, because it is run by people that care. It is run as a program, so we just have to fit everybody into the program, because everybody really needs to be recovered. I mean, this is America. We don't leave you behind. Let's do it. So, any other questions? Yes, sir. Just one more. Yeah.
Who is our best resource within the city, within the county?
Well, I'm not in city government, but I think the city is going to look at those things. I think the county's looking at those things. Very often it's become nonprofit. They have usually a long-term recovery group that starts up and funded by FEMA with some initial funding. Those groups kind of help people through a lot of these steps and stages. Sometimes those long-term recovery groups have lawyers on the group and insurance people and different professions that can give guidance to individuals who don't have experience in those areas. But it's something that we all need to look at. It happens in every disaster, and we need kind of a guidance or a counselor. Like when we were in school, we had the guidance counselor tell us where we're at and get our degree, and kind of what's the next step. And that position isn't.
So I think we're all just looking for somebody who can go through and get some good advice, because there's a lot of different situations that we're all
and
going
this isn't
through.
the first disaster I've heard that
Right.
about. So that really is a spot that could be strengthened in every post-disaster areas to have. But we're dealing with multiple programs, so you got to have a go-to. And that's why the FEMA Office of Advocate, I think, has been they've staffed that up. They have 100 people in D.C. that deal with issues with flood insurance issues. SBA, I don't think has that, but let's look at that.
Also at firm, we did these, shortly after the storm, these seminars that FEMA was there. So we do have some contact information from some of the people that were at those things. I'm not saying that those are great resources, because, they're all from the government and they're here to help. And I'm a little skeptical sometimes. But also, I will tell you, being an insurance agent, don't rule your agent out as a resource for you to kind of help you with that process as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say there's not one, but firm's done a really great job of, even when we've done workshops and projects and stuff like that, they've helped us get the word out. So if there was kind of one conduit, I would say firm's been doing the best job at it, whether it's city or county, because since they do both, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think
another whole matter here. If you can dry flood-proof commercial, why can't you do the same residential? I'm looking back at Hurricane George, only put in about 6 inches of water in my house. That was not bad. Of course, Wilma put in about 4 feet.
Oh,
so my question is, that's certainly a lot cheaper and inexpensive than elevating. Mm-hmm. Why are you not encouraging that?
Yeah, sorry. Before the flood insurance changes for the rates for the high-risk buildings, you could dry flood-proof your house or wet flood-proof your house, so that it didn't matter. Your insurance rates were still subsidized and discounted because you were built before a flood map. We've changed those rules across the country now, and these older buildings are going to have to pay the rates that the risk really reflects for them being a high flood risk building, and we're getting there gradually. We're not going to just slam it on you. The program isn't going to slam it on you. But those are the rules. As residential is different than non-residential. And I don't know why those rules are that way.
Insurance, right? Not for protection of your house.
Well, it has to do with the fact that people stay in their house instead of evacuating. That's one of the big things, is they have this overconfidence that they can stay because it's flood-proofed. I know that that's one thing I've heard several times in circles at the federal level and the state level. It's the rules, and I don't.
That's
3 years ago,
Europe's different, but Europe doesn't have flood insurance, so.
3 years ago in this very room, we had some executives from FEMA, from the NFIP here, and we asked them that very question. And they suggested it was much akin to smoke detectors, was their analogy, in that for years it wasn't a discount on your insurance, your homeowner's insurance, if you had smoke detectors, but inevitably it proved over time that smoke detectors did reduce damage and save lives, so now it becomes a discount on your insurance, and they didn't have that data for residential buildings. So I said, well, great. We've got a perfect test pilot neighborhood, to do this in, several here in the city. And we started working towards that, and we have a working group that's assembled on that. But one of the obstacles we're finding with dry flood proofing is how do we make it effective for a home? Because what happens is if we start protecting the entrances, then it doesn't take too long before the rising water starts collapsing your walls. So it's not just about stopping the water coming in where you think it's going to come in, but through the walls because of the pressure building up, and through the slab, because it'll percolate right up through some of these slabs unless they've had barriers there. And another thing we're looking into is can we make a subterranean barrier? And we're looking at various elements that we could inject into the ground to make that sort of wall. But that's all in the developmental theoretical stage. And if we could get a pilot program like we've been suggesting, it would be the first in the nation.
There you go.
But the only distinction between dry proofing and elevating is if you dry proof it. Dry proof it, you're just not going to get the discount on your insurance. That's the only difference.
Absolutely. So you can still do it to protect your home.
Yes.
You
To
just
me,
won't
the
get
way I
discount.
look at things, what's the most cost-effective thing?
Or even instead of dry flood proofing, just wet flood proofing, elevating your outlets to here instead of down here.
Right.
Putting in the concrete board instead of wall board, sheetrock, so you can unscrew it and dry it out real quick and screw the panels back on and repaint and
I mean, I think part of the process
tile floors instead of
would,
carpet.
as somebody, as a consultant, would say, hey, listen, it's much more cost-effective for you to dry proof and wet proof than rather than elevate based on the numbers you're telling me or
But
talking
remember,
about.
when you go to actuarial rates within the 12, 14 years, which maybe at the end of your mortgage you may have sold the house by then, somebody will inherit that elevated insurance cost, and if it's at $9,500 a year, 10 years of $9,500 a year, you've paid off the project. So that's the quandary we're in.
Just going to find some wealthy person that comes down here, buy cash, and not carry insurance.
And people are making decisions about their property based on where they're at financially and where they're going to be in the future. And every owner and every structure is different. And we all got to navigate this, or you all got to navigate it for yourself. And we come in when you decide to elevate or dry flood proof the.
You also have to do that cost-benefit analysis of, once I get 3 feet above freeboard, what does my premium look like for flood versus what I'm paying for flood today, and kind of that difference, which is huge, kind of incorporated back into the cost of that elevation.
Yeah, there is a annual savings for payback. of
It's
that.
pretty large, pretty large.
About 7:30, and I know that Tyler's still back there. If anybody else is interested in doing some more of this review on their options to get a printout, I want to thank you all, those of you that stayed. Thank you for the others who've already departed. I know some people probably had to drive back to the other keys. I'm here until Friday evening for usable time because I'm out Saturday morning for this trip, but I anticipate being back. Please come get a card if you want me to come meet with you and talk with you. I'm here for several days. Thank you very much.
Again, thanks everyone for attending.
There's sandwiches back here in the corner and water. Please help yourself. Thank you for being here.